Hello and welcome to the Li-Fi Club's online lecture series. For the first time in more than 20 years, fighting is back between Armenia and Azerbaijan in the disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh. Many civilians and soldiers have lost their lives. Ceasefires have been agreed with serious implications for the two countries, and this conflict is threatening to destabilize the region around them. But what triggered the violence? What impact will it have on the world? Will this conflict spread and pull in the major powers of the region? And can a peaceful settlement be reached in the future? To answer these pertinent questions, we are joined today by Dr. Hratch Tchilingirian. Dr. Hratch is a sociologist and an associate faculty member of Oriental Studies at the University of Oxford, specialising in Middle Eastern and Armenian studies, with a particular focus on identity politics, homeland-diaspora relations, and inter-ethnic conflicts in the Middle East and the Caucasus. He is the author of numerous studies, publications, and books, including Karabakh and Abkhazia, the struggle for independence in the post-Soviet South Caucasus. He has lectured internationally and in recent years has drawn attention to the plight of minority communities in the Middle East, especially in academic and policy circles. Thank you, Dr. Hratch, for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation to spend this time with you and your club members.
And I am Satyajit Mohanan, co-director of the Li-Fi Club, and with me today is my co-moderator, Maria Gaboyan, who is a recent graduate from the University of St. Andrews, where she read international relations and psychology. She's currently pursuing her master's at the Edinburgh University's Law School. Thank you, Maria, for being here with us today.
Thank you. I'm very excited.
We will now move on to a brief talk by Dr. Hratch on the current crisis in the Caucasus and the issue at hand. Over to you, Mr. Hratch.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start saying that in 2004, during a press conference, Russian President Vladimir Putin made a very interesting statement. And he said, in the wake of the breakup of the Soviet Union, many conflicts of ethnic and confessional nature have broken out. And he said, we do have up to 2,000 conflicts of the type which are in the dormant stage. And if we don't do anything about them, they could provide a flare-up instantaneously. And he mentioned Nagorno-Karabakh as one of these ethnic conflicts. In fact, the collapse of the Soviet Union triggered unprecedented processes of rapid and long-term transitions in virtually all aspects of life: political, social, economic, religious, cultural, and territorial, of course. One of the most contentious problems in the process of transition and social restructuring, especially in the former Soviet periphery, is the right of self-determination of nationalities versus the territorial integrity of newly independent states. In the Caucasus, unresolved conflicts from the late 19th and early 20th centuries that were actually frozen when the region was Sovietized, re-emerged in, for example, Chechnya, Abkhazia, South Ossetia, Nagorno-Karabakh, and other parts of this region, which is actually the homeland of over 23 nationalities or ethnicities. Soviet colonization, as we know, did not bring relief or solutions to these existing territorial and cultural autonomy disputes, but contained them through various state measures, ranging from granting, for instance, limited autonomy to forced population shifts. So as such, when an opportunity rose in the period starting with perestroika in the mid-1980s, disadvantaged groups in the Soviet Union responded quickly to cues suggesting that they are justified in acting on old grievances. Nagorno-Karabakh serves as an example that when social and political restructuring is resisted or ignored over a long period of time by a dominant group, for instance, Azerbaijan, alternative measures are sought by the minority group, in this case the Karabakh Armenians, either to force a change or to create a new social order. The measures sought to institute changes vary from peaceful civic initiatives to armed struggle and full-scale war. And we see this kind of examples throughout the world. The scope and range of the means are determined by internal and external factors and are in proportion to the sources that are available to each group. So the historically documented continuous presence of Armenians in the mountainous region of Karabakh, at least since medieval times, is a fundamental factor in this process of restructuring and in the political discourse of Karabakh Armenians. In September 1991, the Supreme Soviet of Nagorno-Karabakh declared an independent Republic of Mountainous Karabakh, and later it was renamed as the Republic of Artsakh, which is used currently. This was confirmed by a referendum in December 1991, and of course boycotted then by the Azeri minority. No state, obviously, including the Republic of Armenia, has recognized Karabakh's statehood. For nearly 3 decades, Nagorno-Karabakh, a small 4,400 square kilometer territory in the South Caucasus, with an Armenian population of about 150,000, remains the oldest unresolved conflict in the former Soviet Union. And the crux of the conflict, as I mentioned, is the right of self-determination of the Armenians of Karabakh, on one hand, and the territorial integrity of what is now the Republic of Azerbaijan, which was formerly the Azerbaijan Soviet Socialist Republic in the USSR. Now, throughout the centuries, the boundaries of the region known as Nagorno-Karabakh today have shifted and redrawn depending on invaders, types of conquest, territorial and administrative divisions, and the relationship of the major powers dominating the region. The long list of foreign domination includes, for instance, the Arabs, Seljuk Turks, Mongols, Turkmens, Ottoman Turks, Persians, Tsarist Russians, and finally the Soviet Union. Under communist regime, Nagorno-Karabakh was ceded to Azerbaijan, despite the fact that its population was well over 90% Armenian and desired union with Armenia. Throughout the Soviet period, the Armenian majority of Karabakh never reconciled itself to Azeri rule. For decades, they complained to the central authorities in Moscow, Baku, and Yerevan about the increasing economic, social, and cultural difficulties in their enclave, but to no avail. Even during the very repressive 1930s, there were instances of non-violent protest in Karabakh. With the Khrushchev thaw in the 1950s and 60s, protests in the form of letters and petitions to Moscow increased by Karabakh Armenians. And the lessons of history, as it were, are an important theme in contemporary Armenian political discourse. Hence, past objective factors affecting the collective life of the Armenians in Soviet Karabakh contribute to the construction of their subjective perceptions today. While they were viewed and treated as minority nationality in Azerbaijan by the tutelar authorities, Armenians as the majority in an administrative subunit of the Soviet Union differed from this view and perceived themselves as citizens with constitutional rights for at least cultural autonomy, if not full autonomy. Now, whether intentional or byproduct of state policies, the alarm of depopulation and cultural extinction was real for Karabakh Armenians, at least as they perceived it. As we know from many studies around the world, when the components that define a group are threatened, such as economic, cultural, social plausibility structures, group efforts are mobilized to protect or strengthen. Starting from the 1920s, Azerbaijan's Karabakh policy hinged on keeping the lid tight on territorial claims and eventually neutralized demands by instituting various administrative policies affecting the socio-economic and cultural life of Karabakh Armenians. The construct that Karabakh Armenians are ungrateful foreigners living on Azerbaijani territories is part of the extreme othering of the Armenians, which has been actually embedded in Azerbaijani historiography and has been reinforced through government policies in the Soviet era and today. On one hand, Baku claims that Karabakh is an indivisible part of Azerbaijan. On the other hand, it views the indigenous Armenian population as the others. So now, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the dispute over Nagorno-Karabakh was transformed from a domestic Soviet conflict into an international issue. Besides Russia, a number of countries and international organizations proposed various unsuccessful initiatives. The most important of these has been the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which since 1992 has been actively facilitating negotiations in the form of its Minsk group, whose co-chairmen are Russia, France, and the United States since 1997. The main difficulty facing attempts to reach a solution to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict has been the friction between the principles of territorial integrity and the right of self-determination, as noted. The international community's position is that the territorial integrity of the countries of the former Soviet Union should be maintained. However, Karabakh Armenians have argued persistently that just as Azerbaijan had the legal choice to secede from the Soviet Union in 1991, Armenians too, under the law governing the Soviet Union at the time, had the right to secede from Azerbaijan. Indeed, the legal processes of declaration of independence of both Azerbaijan and Nagorno-Karabakh are among the most contested issues in the conflict. On August 30th, 1991, the Supreme Council of Soviet Azerbaijan declared independence by restoring the independent Republic of Azerbaijan that had existed between 1918 and 1920, and declared, this is important, the establishment of Soviet power in Azerbaijan as illegal. So by refusing to become the legal successor of Azerbaijan Soviet Socialist Republic, Baku freed itself from recognizing Nagorno-Karabakh as an autonomous region, a sort of a semi-state within the legal framework of the Soviet Union. As we know, in 1923, the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh were recognized as a legal entity within Soviet Azerbaijan by becoming a state within a state, that is the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast or region. As such, legally speaking, the Mountainous Karabakh Republic was declared over territories that the Republic of Azerbaijan, in view of the fact, of course, that it had rejected the Soviet legal system, had no sovereignty over. So Nagorno-Karabakh was not part of the First Republic of Azerbaijan between 1918 to 1920. The Armenians of Karabakh declared independence based on the same operative laws of the Soviet Union of the time. The law granting rights to autonomous entities and national settlements to independently decide their legal and administrative status in case the host republic would exit the USSR. So based on this provision of the law, Nagorno-Karabakh organized a referendum on December 10th, 1991, in the presence of international observers, by which the people of Nagorno-Karabakh expressed their will for independence. This provided legitimacy to Nagorno-Karabakh's independence in the legal context of the USSR's disintegration. And this is a very important point. In the legal and operative the laws that were operative at the time in the USSR. As such, when in 1992, the international community recognized the post-Soviet states, including the Republic of Azerbaijan, it failed to recognize that Nagorno-Karabakh had not been part of Azerbaijan, legally speaking, starting in 1991. So as the Soviet Union was crumbling, Azerbaijan responded militarily to Karabakh's declaration of independence and escalated the conflict into a full-scale war. In addition to a campaign to force the Armenian population of Karabakh to leave, Baku believed that the relentless bombardment of the capital Stepanakert could quickly resolve the conflict. But the military solution had more dire consequences. Not only Stepanakert was physically devastated and hundreds killed, but also the societies of Karabakh, Azerbaijan, and Armenia were deeply militarized. Between 1992 and 93, Karabakh Armenians, with military help from Armenia and Russia, obviously, achieved major military advances against large-scale Azerbaijani offensives. When a ceasefire agreement was signed between the warring parties in May 1994, Karabakh forces controlled not only what were the boundaries of Karabakh in Soviet times, but a large swath of Azerbaijani territories surrounding the enclave, or what are known today as the 7 regions around Karabakh. The return of these occupied territories has been a significant element in the negotiations process over the years. The war in the early 1990s, as we know, claimed some 30,000 lives on both sides, created more than 350,000 refugees in Armenia and 700,000 in Azerbaijan, and destroyed hundreds of villages and so on. Since May 1994, negotiations continued under the OIC Minsk Group for nearly 3 decades, 26 years to be exact. And all this time, the sides to the conflict have been unsuccessful to find an acceptable settlement or solution. In the meantime, they continued to acquire massive arms, especially Azerbaijan, which has spent billions on advanced, sophisticated weapons far beyond the military capabilities of the Armenians. So on 27th of September this year, Azerbaijan, with the open and substantial support of Turkey, launched a massive military attack on the entire contact line between Karabakh Armenians and Azerbaijani forces. Even as thousands have been killed and massive destructions inflicted on both sides, the war, now into its second month, continues, as we all know. Karabakh Armenians maintain that any solution leaving Karabakh within Azerbaijani jurisdiction is not acceptable, as it is a threat to their very existence. In the past, Baku had expressed willingness to grant a high degree of autonomy to Karabakh and considers full independence as an infringement of its territorial integrity. However, on 22nd of October, 3 weeks into the current war, President Aliyev declared that there will be no referendum in Karabakh ever. So it remains to be seen whether the current war will resolve the most fundamental and contentious issues between the sides. So we shall see. Thank you.
Thank you for this interesting informative talk. We now have some questions for you. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you once again. That was very informative. Our first questions look more closely at the narratives from both sides. So as you have shown in your presentation, this war is flaring up within the territory of Azerbaijan. Taking this into account, firstly, we would like to know to what extent can this war be seen as an Armenian occupation? And secondly, to what extent would the Armenians view this conflict in the context of the Armenian genocide that happened a century ago, and hence see this war as an existential threat? Thank you.
This is a very important question and quite complex, but basically it is a question as to where do we draw the line between so-called international political norms and protection of innocent lives or civilians. As I noted, during the war in the early 1990s, Karabakh Armenians were able to create a cordon sanitaire, as it were, or a security zone by militarily controlling Azerbaijani territories beyond the borders of what used to be Soviet Karabakh. The return of the control, or the return of these territories, known as the 7 Azerbaijani regions, to Azerbaijan, has always been on the table during the negotiations since 1994. I mean, Karabakh Armenians see them as an element of securing Karabakh's final status. Of course, yes, there have been some Armenian circles who call these liberated territories, but on the international level, in the negotiations process, their eventual return to Azerbaijan in return for security and status has always been there, and this continues to be the case. Ironically, or more cynically, the two main states that are providing enormous military assistance to Azerbaijan, hardware, drones and bombs, and military advice to Azerbaijan, that is Turkey and Israel, have themselves refused to comply with UN Security Council resolutions to return occupied territories in northern Cyprus and Israel-Palestine, respectively. Azerbaijan, for instance, continues to invoke the 1993 UN Security Council resolutions as justification for its military actions. But Baku's selective, interpretation of these resolutions leaves out Azerbaijan's own obligations. For instance, UN Security Council Resolution 822 demands the immediate cessation of all hostilities and hostile acts with a view to establish a durable ceasefire. Another violation of this resolution is Turkey's open and comprehensive support to Azerbaijan. Again, in my view, the main question is, does violation of UN resolutions, even if they are true, or even if they are the case, justify the bombing and killing of thousands of people on all sides?
Thank you, sir. The second question would be, Turkey continues to vociferously support Azerbaijan's endeavors, whilst Russia remains cautious in relation to its actions towards both sides, despite maintaining a difference pact with Armenia. This is unusual for Moscow, given its previous aggressive postures across the region in Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia. So what are the factors that you believe are encouraging Putin's caution?
A very good question indeed. I believe we have to bear in mind a few important aspects regarding Russia. First, as we know, Russia at the moment has bigger and more complex internal and external issues to deal with within its own immediate region and internationally. Second, I believe, unlike the other countries you mentioned, such as Ukraine, Russia is formally one of the mediators in the OSCE Minsk group and is one of the co-chairs, as I mentioned. So this is an important aspect. Also, we should not forget that Russia has good relations with Azerbaijan and Turkey, more or less, and could not just take sides in this decades-long conflict. Third, I believe Russia has made it clear that basically Moscow has treaty obligations to defend the Republic of Armenia, but the Karabakh issue has to be sorted out, as it were, by the sides in the conflict themselves. Finally, more than Karabakh, I believe what concerns Moscow is Turkey's involvement, especially the deployment of jihadist mercenaries in a region that is part of the geostrategic orbit of Russia. So ultimately, this might be a critical factor for more active Russian engagement in this region. I believe the longer this war continues, the more regional powers or actors will be drawn into the conflict.
It appears that in the most recent rounds of engagements in Nagorno-Karabakh, a new style of warfare has emerged. New tactics of drone warfare, usage of cluster munitions, and the recruitment of foreign mercenaries. That appears to be working in Azerbaijan's favor. As a result of this, do you believe Armenia would be more or less likely to accept a political settlement which concedes any of the sovereignty of territories currently under Armenian control? Thank you.
Yeah, a very good question. As I mentioned, the territories have always been on the agenda of the negotiations for some over 25 years. Obviously, what Azerbaijan is trying to do with this current war is to take control of not only the 7 regions around Karabakh, but also Karabakh itself. President Aliyev, if successful, believes that there would be no need for negotiations, as Karabakh would be completely empty of Armenians and under Baku's full control. So as I noted just recently, he said there won't be a need for a referendum in Karabakh. Therefore, for Karabakh Armenians, this is not only an imposed war, but a war for their very existence, for which they have and they feel that there is no choice but to fight.
Thank you very much. Sati, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. So the final question would be as to what resolution do you see to this 30-year-old conflict? And I mean, can we hope for a bright and peaceful future?
Regrettably, I do not see an immediate solution to this conflict. One thing is clear, looking at many other conflicts around the world, that wars do not resolve conflicts. They delay solutions, but they don't resolve conflicts. Ultimately, what needs to happen is finding a political solution, a political agreement that would resolve the contentious issues between the sides. Otherwise, just as in history and in many examples around the globe, a conflict like Karabakh could continue for many, many decades. So the question that I would like to pose for all of us to contemplate is this: is the enormous cost in human lives worth paying for a conflict that everyone, especially the international community, knows that ultimately has to be resolved by a peaceful agreement?
Thank you very much, sir. This brings us to the end of today's lecture series. Thank you for joining us today. It was very informative and is truly an honor to have had you speak for the club today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation.